Hello, everyone. My name is Shelley Reed. I am the manager of the Legal Services National Technology Assistance Project. We're here today for our data specialist office hours. We have a speaker, Mary Johnson, who is one of the data community, and I'll let her introduce herself and talk about what she's going to speak today. But she's going to do a short demonstration and talk, and then we will turn off the recording so that we can have a community discussion. So take it on over, Mary.
Thank you so much, Shelley. And before I get started, I also just want to extend a huge thank you to Susan Vincent as well for convening this data specialist group and really just her leadership and sharing knowledge and expertise about data in legal aid, especially Power BI and PowerQuery. So thank you so much, Susan. Wouldn't be here today without your awesome work. Hi everyone. My name is Mary Johnson. I am a data analyst at Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid in Austin, Texas. It's a little dark and stormy here in Austin today, but I'm so happy to be here with you all. And I'm going to be talking about PowerQuery. So let me just start sharing my screen. And I also have we'll have the chat open, but feel free to let me know if there's ever anything in the chat that I'm not seeing while we're talking here today. Okay. Awesome. We should be able to see a nice, lovely Power BI interface here. So yeah, just kind of before we dive in, if people want to share in the chat or just out loud, how many people have used PowerQuery before, or kind of what your level of expertise, maybe like beginner, middle, or advanced, if anyone wants to share out. All right, well, I'm kind of going to talk to mostly some more beginner and intermediate steps today. And hopefully there's going to be something here for everyone, whether you're new to PowerQuery or you've been using it for a while. I feel like there's always more to learn. But I will also share that I had never used PowerQuery or Power BI before I started working for Legal Aid about 2.5 years ago. So totally learned with the help of Google and lots of resources out there. So if you're new to this, if this feels like just Greek to you today, know that we all started there at one point and it gets easier with time. So what is PowerQuery? PowerQuery is an extract, transform, load tool as part of the Microsoft suite that you can use to import data from a variety of different sources, prepare that data for analysis and visualization, and load it into a destination like an Excel spreadsheet or a Power BI data model. And this training today is going to focus specifically on Power BI for desktop. So this is the version that's going to be used in your Power BI or Excel desktop apps, and specifically in Power BI. So what can we use PowerQuery to help us do? Connect to different data sources, transform and clean data, create custom columns, aggregate data, and so much more. So why would I want to use PowerQuery as opposed to just doing my data cleaning in Excel or using one of many other data tools out there? So I really like that it has a very user-friendly no-code interface. So you don't have to have any coding experience to use PowerQuery. There's lots of buttons you can click and there's lots of resources online. But if you are interested in exploring coding, something you want to get into or something you already do, you can write code in the query language M to create custom functions if you like in PowerQuery. You can also combine and reshape data from a lot of different sources. So just kind of some examples from the Microsoft ecosystem, if your organization works in that ecosystem, SharePoint lists, spreadsheets, text files stored in SharePoint or OneDrive. You can also pull data from API calls. The data that I'll be using in the demo today is pulled from the Legal Server Reports API for those of you who are Legal Server users. Web pages, databases, the list is really long of different data sources you can pull from. And it's also really helpful because if you are doing a data project in Power BI, say that's an analysis, a dashboard, you're just making a presentation for a particular event, when you do your data cleaning in PowerQuery, it saves a very clear record of all the different steps that you took. So in 6 months, if you need to return to your project and remember all of the things that you did, it's saved right there with the analysis, but it's not in a separate file. It's not in a separate document somewhere. It's just saved in one place. And I find that personally to be very helpful. And kind of going off of that, since it does save a clear record of the data cleaning steps that you take, it can help you automate repetitive data transformation steps and reuse them across projects in the future. And that is something you can do kind of in a low code, no code way, or by creating custom functions, which I'll talk about a little bit at the end. And what are some of the limitations of PowerQuery? So it doesn't physically store any of the data that you've created or combined like a database would. So every time you refresh your data in Power BI, the beautiful query that you've made, it's basically going to kind of start from scratch and load the data into memory every time. So that's just something to keep in mind. As a result, it can be a little slow to load if you have very large or very complex queries. So when I'm doing things in Power BI just generally, and especially if I'm doing any kind of querying and data transformation in PowerQuery, I like to keep the data not too large, just knowing it will be slower the larger and more complex it is. And it integrates with a very specific set of products within the Microsoft ecosystem. So this is probably best kind of aimed at folks who are in the Microsoft ecosystem using other tools, Power BI, SharePoint, etc. So yeah, without further ado, I'm going to dive straight into the demonstration. And this is just the Power BI desktop interface. I have my very simple desktop file that I created, but if I want to get to the Power Query editor, I'm just going to go to Transform Data up here and click Transform Data, and it will open it right up. So the data that we're going to be working with today in this demo is a very simple sample legal server report. It is just a case-based report. So even if you're not, someone who works in legal server, whatever your case management system is, this is just a very basic report. It's all test data with one row per case and just some very simple basic columns. So from the legal server reports API, and Susan also has a great video on this that is available on the Legal Aid Data website if you're interested in more detail for how to pull reports via the API, but I reported it here as an XML. It's considered a web data source, and I have it in here ready to go. Thank you for linking that, Susan. And the next step, this is kind of automatically do, is navigation. So it's going to open all of your columns. You can kind of see the basis of my report. I've got the case ID, the intake date, date open, date closed, and a couple other fields, case disposition, and kind of going over also some numeric fields, so percentage of poverty, total household size, etc.
All right, I'm still seeing the text and the what is PowerQuery.
Thank you so much. I'm going to stop my share and try to get that fixed. Thank you so much for letting me know, Susan. Yeah, and please don't let me go on and on throughout this if you all can't see the proper screen. Okay, is that better?
Yep, seeing it now.
Awesome. Okay. Well, so sorry about that, everyone, but kind of going back, this is what the Power Query editor looks like. And since we're popped back into it now, I guess I can give a quick overview. At the top, kind of similar to in Excel, we've got this ribbon with lots of different things you can do to your data. And there's going to be some different tabs. We're going to be focusing today on the Home tab, the Transform tab, the Add Column tab, and the View tab. But just kind of similarly to in Excel, there's just different tabs with lots of different functions and tools that you can use. Over here in the queries section, it's just going to list all the different queries that you have in this particular Power BI desktop file. So I have a couple different ones, but I can see the one I'm right now is my sample legal server report. So I mentioned it's from the reports API. When I click navigation here, these are sort of the steps that when you load in a web data source like this reports API call, it will kind of automatically do this navigation. And it will automatically do something else, which is assign what it thinks are the correct types to your data. And so this is where we might want to check what Power Query is doing. Because if you see here, and Susan also has a great explanation of this in one of the other videos on the site, the intake date loads in the different dates in this text format with lots of times. And Power Query tries to convert it from UTC to what it thinks is the correct time zone. But in doing that, and if you saw, it's actually changing the date that's there, and I don't want that. So one of the first things I generally do is I actually get rid of this step where Power BI is trying to change the data type because I don't want that. But I'd rather change the data type myself so I know for sure that I can get the correct thing. So one thing I'm going to do on this intake date column, just kind of looking at it, I'm like, I want to get rid of everything after that T. I just want to see those first few digits there that actually have the date. So I'm going to go over to transform columns. And there's a lot of different options in here. You can do things like, have it detect the data type, split the column, different formatting. But the one I'm going to use here is extract. And I'm just going to extract the first. Oh, let me just undo that. I'm going to do the first, actually I'm going to do a range here. So there's a couple different ways you can do this, but I just want to do characters from 0 to 10. And when I click that, it will subset the column in this really beautiful way. There's a lot of different ways you can kind of do similar things in PowerQuery. So for example, if I do date opened, I can go back to extract. And maybe I want to say text before delimiter. If I want to remove everything before the T, maybe there's like different numbers of characters in my data set. So I can also do it this way, remove everything before the delimiter. And I'll just do that again for this last one. And now my 3 date columns are in a format where I can go up here to data type. It's currently reading as text, but I'd like it to read as a date, and click that. And now it looks like this is reading the correct date. Just confirm that first one should have been June 9th. It's still showing up as June 9th. So that's awesome. And this is kind of one of the first steps you want to do when you have your data in, is just making sure everything's reading it as the correct data type. It seems basic, but it's definitely the backbone of what I do with every single report in PowerQuery. And most of these are text fields, so that's like looking good. But some of these other ones, percentage of poverty, total household size, I'd really prefer these to be numbers. So I'm going to click these columns again, and you can click on the data type here to change them, or you can also go up here to data type. For this one, I'm going to just make the percentage of poverty a decimal number, and the total household size, I'm going to make into a whole number. So this is looking great. And one note I will say, percentage of poverty, there is an option to do a percentage type here, but I'll show you what happens if I actually click percentage. We'll just say add new step. It's going to really multiply the percentage to something that was not what I started with, because it's assuming that when you're moving from a number to a percent, 1 is 100%, but that's not the format my data was in. So I'm just going to leave it as a number for now, knowing that I don't want to accidentally multiply it to something much bigger. But yeah, okay, so this is looking good. I have most of my data types in the right format. Just another note here, I'm going to make sure my computer is plugged in. I've had some issues with my charger lately. And okay. All right, I'm actually so sorry, y'all. I'm going to stop for about 5 seconds. I don't want to make sure my computer doesn't die on you. But as we're taking this pause, does anybody have any questions at this point in the training? Because we're going to move on next to creating some conditional columns and some custom columns. But yeah, I'll leave you about 5 seconds to marinate on that while I just make sure my charger is all connected perfectly.
One thing I'll note while Mary's doing that is you can see what's, as she's clicking on the user interface to change things, you can then see everything that's happening in that top kind of function row, which is really kind of a nice way to learn the system, so that it kind of bridges that gap between being a kind of no code to being a low code to being something you can actually get in there and do manually. So I always just like watching to see kind of what's happening in that function bar. And then obviously there's more advanced ways to access that as well, but that's a nice little learning as you go.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Susan. And thank you all for bearing with me. I had my laptop die recently in a meeting. I don't want to put you all through that today. So yeah, that's a great point. Over here in the applied steps section, this is where I talked about how PowerQuery is going to keep a record of everything that we've done. It's giving a name to all these different steps we've taken. If I want to go back to where the data was at the previous step, I just can click on it and sort of see. And it's a nice way to see the progression there, and then also to have a record of exactly what you did for later. So I'm going to save my progress for now by just clicking the save button. I'm going to just do apply later. And we're going to go over now to adding columns. So this is definitely something that I use a lot in PowerQuery. And I'm going to do some very simple ones and some ones that are a little bit more complicated, but anything that you're doing in this add column tab, you might see that there's some of the same text transformations, format extract from the transform tab, and it's just going to apply those to a brand new column. So if for some reason I wanted to take county of residence and do something with it, maybe I wanted to parse this or format this so it was all uppercase. If I click on this here, it's going to create a new column that's applied that transformation. So that may be kind of helpful if you want to do something, test it out, but you don't want to mess with the original column. This is the column, this is the section where you would go to for that. So I often use this really helpful tool called conditional column if I want to make any kind of groupings of my existing variables. So this is a really nice way to play with conditional logic if you're more new to coding, because you don't have to do any coding for this part. I'm just going to call this total household size groups. And the column name that I'm going to be basing this off of is my total household size. And you have a lot of options here. You can choose equals, does not equal, greater than, less than, etc. And it's basically just creating the condition if household size, in this case, I'm going to say is less than 5. I want the output of my new variable to be text that just says less than 5. This is a very simple example. Then maybe I want to create another level. If household size is not in this group, so it's more than 5, but it's less than 10, I want it to say 5 to 10. And I'm going to add one more that's just if household size is greater than 10, it's just going to say 10 plus. Now, this is a very, very simple example. I'm going to add as my last clause here, this null in case there are any null values so they don't throw an error. But then I'm going to click OK. And just like that, I've created this really helpful binning variable. It does do this thing sometimes. I think it believes that the 5-10 is a date. So we're going to say just between 5 and 10. Awesome. So there we go. You can kind of click on this filter button to see what you got here from that. If you need to check your logic or change anything, you can look there. Another thing you can also do, I'm going to set this as a text value. But if you go to the View tab and you click on column profile, it's been popping up a little bit throughout our training, but it's going to show you the distribution of the values. So this looks like maybe this is not totally how I thought it would be. Let's see if I have any. Well, I do have one that's 10, so maybe that makes sense that it's between 5 and 10, but it's like definitely just a way you can check and look there. Another example of groupings you could make, could do a very simple level of service based off of closed reason or another text value where you have a set of values and you just want to group every value into a bin. If you have legal server, it's very similar to what you might do in the lookup transform index, but this can be a way to kind of play around with different groupings here in your specific project that you might not need to put in legal server forever. So going back to the add columns tab, we're going to look at how to do a custom column, which is kind of the next level of complexity from what we just did. And this is where you would just be writing out whatever logic you want your custom column to follow. So I'm just going to call this total household size groups custom. And we're just going to do something that's very similar to what we just did in the conditional column editor, but showing how you can do this in custom columns as well. So I'm going to say if, and then kind of similarly, I can pick my column here that I want to work off of. If total household size, the original, is less than 5, then I want the value to say less than 5. It's very simple, but just bear with me for this. And then no comma, I don't think, else if total household size, we'll just do very, very simple here, is greater than 5, then greater than 5. And we're just going to say else null in case there's any errors. So one thing to note about this is that all of my different logical phrases and words here are lowercase. If they're not all lowercase, it will throw an error and it can be very frustrating. Be like, why is all my logic is right? Why am I getting this error? But it is case sensitive, the PowerQuery language M. So just note that it can be those small things sometimes that throw it off. But for this very basic thing, looks like we're good. No syntax errors have been detected. So I'm going to click OK. And it looks like I'm good. Less than 5, greater than 5, and null is what I expected. So looks like we're good there. Awesome. Does anybody have any questions at this stage? Does else equal or? That is a good question. Let me go back to this. So I don't think the way that I wrote it, it automatically equals or. But Melissa, can you expand on your question a little bit? I'm not sure I could understand.
Else generally will mean if not this, then that. So it's just a shorter way of saying, we put this, and then else means if it's not that, then do this other thing, and then continue on until, you don't have any other options left.
Right. I think if you wanted to add or, that would be like a specific parameter that you'd have to put in. And that is something that you'd want to do in that second option, the custom column versus the conditional column. If you wanted to do anything like if and, for example, like if this condition and this condition, that would be something you'd want to do in that custom editor, or like this condition or this condition would be the custom editor versus that conditional columns where you just kind of clicked and filled stuff in. So yeah. Alrighty, well, I had a little bit more to show today, and what I was going to move to next is kind of looking at some of the functions you can write and the way that you can look at your code and some of the different things you've done in the advanced editor. Yes, for sure. And it's a language, I think that the more you use it and are exposed to it, it will kind of become more natural, but all of the languages have their own kind of quirks. So yeah, it's just one example of another thing you might be doing in the start of your project is changing the column names. So this one, case ID, let's say, I just want to rename it to get rid of the underscores. And if I'm just kind of going through and clicking, I could rename all of my columns that way, but that's pretty time consuming. It's pretty tedious. I might not want to do that. So first, kind of talking towards the way we might automate that, I'm going to go back home and I'm going to click on Advanced Editor. And this is going to take all of the applied steps that I've just been doing by clicking through the different options, and it's going to show them as code. And I'm going to stop my share and reshare again so you all can see that pop up. Learned my lesson. And yeah, can you all see that okay? It should say new sample LS report at the top.
We can.
Perfect. Awesome. So this is kind of taking everything from the source when I imported that data from my reports API link to the different ways I extracted a text range from my different date columns. And basically everything that I did is here in this code. So just a few kind of general things about how the code works in the advanced editor. When you have something that opens with let at the top here, it indicates that everything afterwards is going to be defined as a variable. And just the way that every step has kind of been given this descriptive name, it's because those steps are being defined as variables, and each step references the step that came before it. So just one very easy way, say, you liked the way that you define the logic in this conditional column and you wanted to copy and paste that maybe into another query without having to click through and do all of that again. Yeah, you definitely can. You can copy and paste this whole bag of text if you wanted to, but you do have to just make sure that the names match up, always making sure that each step references the step before. And everything is going to have a comma that comes after it up until the very last step. Then we're going to have the word in. And after in, we're just going to have the name of the very last step that we took. In this case, it was renaming the columns, and that's what's going to be returned at the end there. So I'm going to stop my share on that and go back to the PowerQuery editor, just closing out of that. And I'm going to show just a very simple function, which is kind of the step even beyond just copying and pasting what was in the editor, to do that one step of renaming columns and apply it across queries. So I just wrote a very simple function. This is us actually taking a part out of a more complex function that Susan wrote, which is available on the resource site, but I just thought it might be good to have something simple to start. I am going to pop this back out into the advanced editor so we can look at it. Yes, I see that, Ashley. I will talk about that a little bit more here. Okay. So yes, this is a function in PowerQuery, starting again with that let. And this has kind of wrapped everything in these source parameters, but the real kind of meat of the function is from here, from this to where it says expand. But everything after let is defining some variables, and each step we take is going to be defined with this name. And so kind of what I mean about every row here has to function, has to reference the one before, is that you kind of want to tell PowerQuery what piece of data you want it to work on. And so just an example here, this is a 3-step function. It's going to take the column names from my table, which is T, and just take all of those names, take out the underscores, and replace it with a space. I have to tell it that I want it to work on the table T. So just for every step, you want to be sure that you're telling PowerQuery which data you want it to work on. And so here with the columns, I'm like, okay, I've got the column names for my table T. I also want you to take the data in the columns. I don't want you to change that. And then I want you to put it back together as one table in the end. So in this case, we're still referencing that table T. It's not necessarily the line above, but it just kind of goes back to that principle. PowerQuery doesn't know unless you tell it exactly what data it should be working on. So we've formatted the call names the way we wanted. We've taken the columns without making any changes, and now we're putting it together in a new table that has the columns exactly as they are with the call names that are now cleaned. And that variable here is defined as expand. So it's going to say in expand. And that's kind of the end of the function here. This source thing, I think, was added when I opened to view it in the advanced editor. But yeah, it's just basically that every row, most of these things will have names, and your subsequent queries should reference the specific thing that it should be working on. So yeah, I'm going to close out of this one more time and just go back to what it would look like to apply that function to a clean version of my legal server report. And then we'll stop with all these constant stops and starts of sharing, and we will go into the Q&A. But okay, so one of the things that is really nice that I like about PowerQuery also is if you have everything, so you just wanted to duplicate your whole query and everything that you've done, you can go to manage up here, you can duplicate or you can reference. For the purposes of right now, I'm just going to duplicate it, and I'm just going to kind of undo in this new version the different things that I've done so that I just have a really clean version just at the beginning of how everything looked. And as if I was starting this query anew and I wanted to apply my function, I'm just going to click this fx, and the function that I wrote was named fn clean column names. So I'm going to put that right before my table, fn clean column names. I'm just going to put a set of parentheses around the table, which is the data that I want the function to work on, and then hit enter. So this is amazing. It took out all the underscores. Yay, I don't have to go back and do that manually. And this is just a very simple example, but if you ever find something like that, where this is a repetitive piece of transformation that I'm doing, lots and lots of times, and it's taking me a lot of time, and you have the interest in exploring how to code or write functions, anything that you find would be helpful to automate could be a good candidate for a function. And one thing that I forgot to mention, when you are creating a function, you're going to go to new source and just set it as a blank query. So if, for example, you just wanted to copy and paste this, or an example existing query like the one that Susan has on the resource doc, you would just go to create blank query, copy and paste the text into this box here, and then give it the name that you wanted to give it. So if you are interested in this, but you're like not quite ready at the point to write your own queries, you can definitely use the example one that we have on the doc or just other ones. Maybe you're researching, finding other queries that folks have written. You can definitely use them without having to write them yourself. And just another tip that I found helpful, if you want to use ChatGPT in your work at all, you can put that function, if you're like, I know what this is doing, but I don't understand how it works, into ChatGPT and just say, hey, can you give me a step-by-step breakdown of everything that's happening in this function and how it's working? I have found that to be really helpful. Getting ChatGPT to write functions has not been as successful for me, but can definitely be a tool in the learning process. And maybe I'll get there refining my prompt engineering in time. So yeah, I think that is the broad contours of what I was hoping to cover today. I know we're about 1:31, so I'm going to stop my share. And I don't know if we want to stop the recording. And then I'm just happy to go into questions. And yeah, anything we want to talk about.